They said women couldn't command Apache helicopters. They said a woman couldn't lead a team into enemy territory and come out victorious. They said Brooklyn Scott was just a distraction. But Brooklyn didn't come here to prove them wrong. She came to show them that they were never right to begin with. As she stood in front of the towering Apache, she knew this was her moment, not just to fly, but to lead. In a world where gender defined limits, Brooklyn broke them with every decision she made. With the roar of helicopter blades, she took control, not just of the aircraft, but of her destiny. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no doubt in her mind. The mission ahead would test her, break others, but it would never break her. As she soared into enemy airspace, Brooklyn wasn't just another pilot. She was the one who wiped out an entire enemy brigade, redefining the limits of what women can achieve in combat. Brooklyn Scott had always known that the road to proving herself would be harder than most, but what no one could have prepared her for was the weight of the skepticism that clung to her like a shadow, an invisible barrier that loomed larger than any challenge she had ever faced. From the moment she entered the military academy, Brooklyn had been aware that she was walking into a world that was not built for someone like her. Aviation, especially combat aviation, was dominated by men, a space where the idea of a woman flying a machine as powerful and lethal as an Apache helicopter seemed almost absurd to many. She could feel their eyes on her, the silent judgments, the whispered doubts, the barely concealed smirks. It wasn't just about being a pilot. It was about being a woman pilot. And that, to many, was an oxymoron. During the first few days, Brooklyn kept her head down. She focused on the training, the technical knowledge, and the hours spent in the flight simulators. She wasn't here for anyone's approval, nor did she care for their opinions. But that didn't mean she didn't notice the way they looked at her. How they assumed she wasn't capable of withstanding the pressure. How they questioned her strength both mentally and physically. The other pilots, mostly men, exchanged whispers as if her presence was some kind of joke. They assumed she was here for reasons other than skill. Perhaps just to fill a quota, to be the token woman who would disappear into obscurity. But what they didn't know was that Brooklyn wasn't here to be a footnote in history. She wasn't here to fit anyone's expectations. She had come for one thing, and one thing only, to fly, and to fly better than anyone else in the room. She had seen too many people underestimate her in her life to let that happen again. If they thought she was weak, they would soon learn how wrong they were. The first test flight was set for the following week. Brooklyn was ready. Every moment of her life had led to this point. She had studied the Apache's technical specs meticulously, every maneuver mapped out in her mind, every system and component ingrained in her muscle memory. Yet, the night before the test, Brooklyn couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment settle in her chest. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about the flight. It was about proving a point to the world that had already written her off. When she arrived at the airstrip, the murmurs were already starting. She could see the skepticism in their eyes, their judgments hovering like storm clouds. The senior officers were polite but distant. Their brief nods felt like empty formalities. Even the other pilots, standing in their squads, seemed to expect her to fail, to become the very thing they had all assumed she would be, another woman who couldn't handle the intensity of the job. But Brooklyn knew this was her moment to show them who she really was. She wasn't just a woman stepping into a man's world. She was Brooklyn Scott, a pilot with the skill, the intelligence, and the heart to lead, to fly, and to prove that the sky had no limits. She took her position in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls, and for the first time felt her nerves calm. It wasn't just about the test. It was about something much bigger, something they would understand when they saw her fly. Brooklyn was no stranger to doubt. It had followed her for as long as she could remember. But what made it more unbearable now was that it came from the very people she had once hoped to call her peers. The other pilots, the senior officers, they had all already decided what she was capable of before she even had a chance to prove it. The judgment wasn't just an afterthought. It was embedded in every conversation, every glance, every gesture. It was suffocating. Each day in the academy felt like an uphill battle. The male pilots didn't speak it out loud, but it was obvious that most believed she didn't belong. They questioned her physical strength, whether she could handle the demanding nature of flying an Apache. They questioned her mental fortitude, whether she could remain calm in the heat of battle when decisions had to be made in a split second. They questioned everything about her, except her sheer determination to succeed. Despite the doubts surrounding her, Brooklyn refused to be discouraged. She understood that proving herself wouldn't come easily, but the more they doubted her, the more determined she became. She wasn't going to just be the woman who got through training. She was going to be the one who shattered expectations, who became the best. In the quiet moments between training sessions, when everyone else relaxed, Brooklyn would go over every detail in her head, memorize every procedure, and perfect her techniques. She studied the Apache like an artist studying his craft, learning the nuances, the rhythms, the pulse of the machine. The more Brooklyn focused on her craft, the more the doubt from others fueled her. She felt it every time she walked into the hangar and saw the skeptical eyes. She felt it every time she was paired with another pilot, knowing they assumed she would fail. She didn't mind the challenge. In fact, she thrived under it. Every slight, every insult, every time someone doubted her ability only pushed her harder. She didn't just want to be good enough to get by. She wanted to be exceptional, to make them eat their words when they saw what she could do. Brooklyn knew the journey ahead wasn't just about skill. It was about winning respect. And respect wasn't easily given, especially in a male-dominated field. She had seen women before who had been dismissed, ignored, and forced to work twice as hard just to be seen. That wasn't going to be her. She wasn't here to be a token, a checkbox. She was here to earn her place, to lead, and to show the world that there was nothing she couldn't do. Every move she made, every flight, every challenge, she would prove that she was here to stay, and that she would not be dismissed. In the days leading up to her first major test, Brooklyn felt the pressure rise. But with it came the quiet sense of readiness. She was ready for this. She was ready to show them that being a woman had nothing to do with her ability to fly. It was her passion, her training, and her drive that would speak for her. The moment she would climb into that cockpit, all the doubts, all the judgments would fade away. She was about to prove, once and for all, that she wasn't just another pilot. She was the pilot. The day of Brooklyn's first test flight arrived, and with it came a mixture of anticipation and pressure. This wasn't just any flight. It wasn't merely a routine check to ensure she could handle the Apache's controls. This was the moment when everything she had worked for would be put to the test. There were no second chances, no do-overs. The stakes were as high as they could get. As Brooklyn climbed into the cockpit of the Apache AH-64, a familiar calm washed over her. It was the same feeling she had when she first started flying years ago. The deep connection between her and the machine. The understanding that the helicopter was an extension of herself. In the seat of the Apache, she wasn't just a woman trying to prove herself. She was a pilot, a skilled operator, and this was what she was born to do. The pre-flight checks were second nature. Her fingers flew over the controls, her mind already 10 steps ahead, reviewing every procedure she had memorized and practiced in the simulators. But she was keenly aware of the eyes on her. Her fellow pilots, the senior officers, they were all watching. And they weren't just watching to see if she would succeed. They were watching to see if she would fail. There was no room for mistakes, no space for hesitation. As the blades began to spin and the Apache started to lift off, Brooklyn's heart rate steadied, her focus sharpening. The helicopter rose, heavy with the weight of expectation, but she barely noticed it. She had flown countless hours in simulators, but this was different. This was real. And this was her moment. The initial ascent was smooth, but Brooklyn knew the true test lay ahead. She wasn't just flying. She was proving that she had the skill, the precision, and the ability to handle the pressures that came with being a combat pilot. The helicopter responded to her every command as if it recognized her as its rightful pilot. It was the kind of connection only a few pilots ever felt, and Brooklyn cherished it. It wasn't about mastering the machine. It was about becoming one with it. Her mind raced through the flight path, analyzing every turn, every maneuver. Each move she made was deliberate, calculated. She could hear the sound of the rotors cutting through the air, feel the vibrations of the helicopter, and anticipate every shift in the controls. She was in complete control, not just of the Apache, but of herself. The higher she climbed, the more confident she became. She was no longer concerned with the eyes of her critics on the ground. She was no longer concerned with the doubts others had placed on her. She was simply flying, doing what she was meant to do. When the flight ended and Brooklyn brought the Apache in for a smooth, controlled landing, there was a moment of silence. She could see the shock in the eyes of the onlookers, her fellow pilots, her superiors. They had expected something less. But what they saw was exactly what Brooklyn had always known. A woman who could command the skies just as well as any man. She had passed the test, not just of her skills, but of her resolve, her determination, and her unwavering belief that she was more than capable. It was a victory, but more importantly, It was the first step in proving to the world that she belonged in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter. After Brooklyn's successful test flight, the atmosphere around her shifted. The skeptical glances began to fade, replaced by subtle nods of acknowledgement. But Brooklyn knew this was just the beginning. The true challenge awaited her in the field, where the real test of her skills, leadership, and resilience would unfold. It wasn't enough to simply be a capable pilot. She had to prove time and time again that she could rise to every challenge, no matter how great. Her first mission came sooner than expected. It was an escort mission, a relatively routine task, designed to test her coordination and decision-making under pressure. But for Brooklyn, this mission was more than just an exercise. It was an opportunity to solidify her place among the pilots, to show them that her skills weren't just theoretical or confined to training exercises. This was real, and this was her time to prove her worth. The mission went smoothly at first. Brooklyn kept her focus sharp, her eyes scanning the skies, the terrain, and the communications from her team. As the lead pilot, she was responsible for guiding her squadron safely through hostile airspace. But as they approached the target zone, something unexpected happened. Enemy fire erupted from the ground, forcing Brooklyn and her team to react swiftly. In an instant, the calm, calculated mission turned into a chaotic fight for survival. Bullets whizzed past, and the air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the roar of Apache engines. Brooklyn's training kicked in immediately, and she took control of the situation. She ordered evasive maneuvers, expertly weaving the helicopter through the barrage of fire, while maintaining control and keeping her team intact. After Brooklyn's successful test flight, the atmosphere around her shifted. The skeptical glances began to fade, replaced by subtle nods of acknowledgement. But Brooklyn knew this was just the beginning. The true challenge awaited her in the field, where the real test of her skills, leadership, and resilience would unfold. It wasn't enough to simply be a capable pilot. She had to prove time and time again that she could rise to every challenge, no matter how great. Her first mission came sooner than expected. It was an escort mission, a relatively routine task, designed to test her coordination and decision-making under pressure. But for Brooklyn, this mission was more than just an exercise. It was an opportunity to solidify her place among the pilots, to show them that her skills weren't just theoretical or confined to training exercises. This was real, and this was her time to prove her worth. The mission went smoothly at first. Brooklyn kept her focus sharp, her eyes scanning the skies, the terrain, and the communications from her team. As the lead pilot, she was responsible for guiding her squadron safely through hostile airspace. But as they approached the target zone, something unexpected happened. Enemy fire erupted from the ground, forcing Brooklyn and her team to react swiftly. In an instant, the calm, calculated mission turned into a chaotic fight for survival. Bullets whizzed past, and the air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the roar of Apache engines. Brooklyn's training kicked in immediately, and she took control of the situation. She ordered evasive maneuvers, expertly weaving the helicopter through the barrage of fire, while maintaining control and keeping her team intact. The enemy fire grew heavier, and the mission's success depended on Brooklyn's ability to lead her team through the danger. She gave clear, concise instructions to her squadron, focusing on their strengths and positioning them to neutralize the enemy threat. The pressure was immense, but Brooklyn's calm under fire became the anchor for her team. The other pilots followed her lead, trusting her judgment without question. As the battle raged on, Brooklyn's instincts and tactical knowledge began to shine. She directed her team to engage the enemy positions with precision, coordinating missile strikes and gunfire with expert timing. Her heart raced, but her focus never wavered. Every decision she made was calculated, every move a step closer to victory. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the enemy was subdued. The mission was a success. Brooklyn had led her team to victory, and in doing so, she had proven something more important than just her flying abilities. She had shown that leadership wasn't about authority or rank. It was about being able to make the right calls under pressure, to protect your team, and to see a mission through to its end. When the dust settled and the helicopter touched down safely back at base, Brooklyn knew that her reputation had changed. The other pilots no longer saw her as just a woman in a flight suit. They saw her as a leader, as someone who could be trusted in the heat of battle, and for Brooklyn, that was the true victory. After the success of her first mission, the immediate change in the air around Brooklyn was palpable, though it wasn't as overt as she had imagined. There were no celebratory gestures or accolades. Instead, A quiet shift took place. The skepticism that had once been a constant presence began to wane, replaced by something less obvious but far more powerful: respect. Yet Brooklyn knew better than to assume that it was over, that the doubts had dissipated entirely. She had won a battle, but the war for her place in the squadron was far from over. The other pilots, especially those with more years in the cockpit, were still hesitant to accept her as one of their own. Respect, she had learned, wasn't given easily. It was earned, often through repetition, consistency, and results. While her ability to command the Apache in a life-or-death situation had proven her competence, that alone wouldn't be enough to change the deeply ingrained perceptions of those around her. Every new mission, every maneuver, every command would be a chance for them to reevaluate her, to decide if she was someone worth following, someone who could lead them through the trials of war and the chaos of combat. The pilots had started to look at her differently, but the respect was still fragile, like glass that could shatter with a single misstep. She knew that one slip-up, one mistake, could send her back to square one, where the doubts would return stronger than ever. But that knowledge didn't paralyze her. It fueled her. Brooklyn had learned to thrive under pressure. The more they doubted her, the more driven she became to prove them wrong. As days turned into weeks, the small gestures of acknowledgement began to stack up. A nod from Reynolds, the grizzled veteran who had been so openly critical at first, now felt like a mark of approval. The way the squadron pilots no longer exchanged glances when she gave a command, the way their trust in her became less of a question, and more of a given. It was all a sign that her place among them was no longer up for debate. But Brooklyn knew this wasn't the end. Leadership, true leadership, wasn't just about flying better than anyone else. It was about the people you led, their faith in you, and how you managed to steer them, not only through the skies, but through the uncertainties of war. The question wasn't whether she could handle the physical and mental demands of flying the Apache. She had already proven that. It was whether she could inspire the same loyalty in her team that they gave to each other. Could she be the kind of leader they needed in the heat of battle? Someone who would make the tough calls, who would be there when things got rough. Could she take the weight of their lives into her hands and guide them to safety, no matter the cost? These were the questions that loomed over her now, quiet but constant. Brooklyn knew that she had earned the right to be here, but earning the right to lead was something else entirely. It would take more than just proving herself once. It would take proving herself every single day. As the days passed and the missions became more intense, Brooklyn's resolve hardened. The doubt, the skepticism, the subtle hesitations, none of it mattered anymore. She had a job to do, and she would do it better than anyone else. Her team was counting on her, and that was the only thing that mattered. After several successful missions, Brooklyn began to realize that the true test of her abilities wasn't in the skies. It was in the moments between flights, in the intangible yet essential task of leading her squadron. The initial skepticism from her peers had faded into a quiet but persistent expectation. Brooklyn had earned their respect, but respect alone wasn't enough to build the trust that was required for real leadership. It was one thing to be capable in combat, but it was entirely different to guide a team through the complexities of war, to make decisions that could mean life or death. Every mission that followed was a chance to prove that her leadership was just as sharp as her flying. Brooklyn knew that to command the respect she had earned, she had to keep showing up. Not just as a skilled pilot, but as a leader. She had to inspire confidence in her squadron, to make them believe in her ability to lead them, no matter the circumstances. The pressure to remain steady and unwavering grew with each mission, but Brooklyn welcomed it. She understood that real leadership came from consistency, being the calm in the storm, the one who made the tough calls when everyone else was questioning themselves. But despite her growing confidence in the cockpit, there were still moments of self-doubt. She found herself asking if she was doing enough, if she was making the right calls, if she could push her team to be better without pushing them away. In the silence of those quiet moments, when the adrenaline of battle faded, Brooklyn would remind herself why she was here: to lead, to fly, and to prove that she belonged. It wasn't just about surviving the mission. It was about guiding her team through it, about being someone they could trust when things went sideways. Brooklyn had no illusions about the responsibility that came with her position. She knew that trust wasn't something that could be demanded, only earned one decision at a time. And as the weeks wore on, Brooklyn's confidence as a leader grew stronger. Each mission solidified her place in the squadron, not just as a capable pilot, but as the one they looked to when the stakes were highest. Leadership, she realized, wasn't a title. It was a series of actions built one moment at a time, when the world was watching, or when it was not. As Brooklyn settled deeper into her role, she began to grasp a key truth about leadership. It was not about the accolades or recognition, but about the quiet moments of responsibility that no one else saw. It was about how she carried the weight of the mission on her shoulders, how she guided her team through the complexities of combat, and how she made decisions that would impact not just the outcome of a mission, but the lives of the men and women under her command. In the heat of battle, the stakes were always clear, but it was in the days leading up to a mission, when uncertainty loomed, that leadership truly mattered. The days were often filled with briefings, strategic discussions, and meticulous preparation. Brooklyn was now the one others turned to for direction, for clarity. She no longer felt like an outsider in the squadron. Her place was solidified, but with that came the realization that her actions were under constant scrutiny. Every choice she made could either strengthen or undermine the trust her team had in her. The quiet moments between missions became the ones she valued most, for that was where true leadership was tested. In those moments, Brooklyn often found herself reflecting on what she had learned about herself. The fear that had once held her back, fear of failure, of not being enough, was slowly being replaced by a growing confidence in her ability to lead. But that confidence came with a deeper understanding. Leadership was not about being perfect. It was about being resilient, being able to bounce back from mistakes, and showing her team that no matter how tough the mission, she was ready to face it head on. Her leadership was no longer about proving herself to her peers. It was about earning their trust, earning their belief in her. As the missions became more complex and the pressure grew, Brooklyn understood that her team's success wasn't just about her technical skills or flying ability. It was about their collective bond, their ability to work together under extreme pressure. The true test of leadership, she realized, was in building that bond, in creating a team that trusted each other implicitly. And as Brooklyn looked toward the challenges ahead, she knew that her greatest strength was not in her ability to fly, but in her ability to lead, to inspire, and to never back down. As the missions grew more complex, Brooklyn's role as a leader became even more defined. She no longer questioned her place in the squadron. The respect she had earned was solidified, but it wasn't enough to rest on her laurels. Brooklyn understood that leadership required continuous effort, consistency, and an ability to adapt. The stakes were higher and the pressure was unrelenting. Each mission was a test, not only of her skills, but of her ability to guide and protect her team. It became clear to her that leadership wasn't just about decision-making in the heat of battle. It was about preparation, foresight, and the small moments that built trust and confidence within the squadron. Brooklyn started to focus on strengthening the bond between herself and her team. She knew that her success didn't come from her alone. It was the collective effort of everyone under her command. To inspire her squadron, she needed to understand them, not just as pilots, but as individuals with their own fears, strengths, and challenges. Brooklyn learned that vulnerability played a role in leadership too. By allowing her team to see her struggles, her moments of uncertainty, she humanized herself in their eyes. It showed them that she was not infallible, but that she was committed to learning and growing alongside them. This openness fostered a deeper connection, one rooted in mutual respect and understanding. In the face of mounting pressure, Brooklyn knew that leadership meant more than being the one to make the tough calls. It was about being the foundation upon which her team could rely. She had come to understand that true leadership was a journey, not a destination. The challenge was ongoing, and Brooklyn was ready to face whatever came next. As Brooklyn's reputation continued to grow, so did the expectations placed upon her. She had earned the respect of her squadron, but the path ahead was far from simple. Leadership, she realized, wasn't just about proving herself in the air, it was about sustaining that trust, continuing to make decisions that protected her team, and ensuring that they remained cohesive, no matter the challenges they faced. The pressure to maintain this level of performance was constant. Every new mission brought its own unique risks, and with each success, the stakes grew higher. Brooklyn knew that she couldn't afford to rest on her laurels, not when the lives of her team were in her hands. The trust they placed in her was both a privilege and a heavy responsibility. Through every challenge, Brooklyn found herself continuously evolving, not just as a pilot, but as a leader. She started to focus more on mentorship, taking the time to nurture the skills of her fellow pilots, helping them grow alongside her. Leadership, she understood, wasn't just about commanding the skies. It was about building a team capable of flying together in perfect harmony. The more Brooklyn led, the more she came to understand the subtle nuances of leadership. It wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up every day for her team. It was about being there when they needed guidance, knowing when to step back and knowing when to take charge. Brooklyn had become the kind of leader who was not only trusted with the mission, but with the people who flew beside her. And as the future loomed before her, she knew that no matter the challenges, she was ready to lead them through it, because leadership was not a destination, but a journey she was committed to walking.